You know, Von and them stole all his shit back in the day. Boss Top and all them, they broke in there, stole his jewelry. They all was in California or whatever. They robbed him. Like when Von died, did he post him? He out here fucking the shit out of his sister.
Everybody who Chief Keef has lost, he's never posted them on social media.
And he ain't give a fuck about the rest of them niggas. This is what I'm telling you.
Why Chief Keef never said anything in terms of like rest in peace to Vaughn or anything like that?
It was close. Keef always been a little stubborn, motherfucker, you know? Especially, like, when you got the money, he got more stubborn.
What if the man connected to King Von's death told the world he's sitting on an unreleased track with Chief Keef? That's not a rumor. That's not speculation. Lul Timm went on camera and said it himself. Casually, like it wasn't a bomb he was dropping. And the second that clip hit the internet, it didn't just spread, it exploded. Because people didn't hear music news when they watched that clip. They heard history. They heard a name they hadn't forgotten. And suddenly, everything from 2020 came rushing back. But here's what most people missed. This situation didn't start with Lul Timm's claim. It started weeks earlier, with a collaboration that already had people talking. February 2026. Mike Will Made It drops a track called Rooms. Chief Keef and NBA Youngboy on the same record, two names that had never shared a beat before. For casual fans, it was historic. Streams went through the roof. People were calling it a legendary moment. But for a certain group of people watching, this wasn't something to celebrate. It was a red flag. Because to understand why that collab caused tension, you have to understand something that most people outside Chicago overlook. Chief Keef doesn't come from O'Block. He never did. He comes from Lamron, same city, loosely same broader culture, but not the same circle, not the same set. And those lines aren't details. Those lines are everything. Now go back to 2014. Something happened that most people online have completely forgotten. There was a situation involving people connected to O'Block and Keef's personal space. Reports came out that people ran through his home, took things, created a situation serious enough that police got involved. Nothing major came of it publicly in terms of charges, but the message it sent was loud. There was real tension between those worlds, and Keef heard it. Because right after that, he left. He didn't make a big announcement about it. He didn't go on interviews talking about the conflict. He just quietly built distance between himself and Chicago, moved to a different state, started operating on his own terms. By the time King Von was rising and O'Block was getting international attention, Keef was already gone, living somewhere else entirely, building a lane that had nothing to do with local Chicago politics. So when people online assumed that Keef and O'Block were naturally aligned, they were missing that entire backstory. The loyalty people expected from him was never really there in the way they imagined. Now bring that context into 2020. November 6th, Atlanta. Outside a club, King Von and his people crossed paths with another group. Tension built fast. It turned physical, then shots. Multiple people hit. King Von didn't survive. He was 26 years old, one of the fastest rising voices in drill music, and just like that, it was over. The name that kept coming up in connection with what happened that night was Lul Timm. He was arrested, charged, and the case dragged on for years. But eventually, it was dropped. No conviction, no trial. Legally, it was over. But in people's minds, it was never over. And that's the part that matters for everything that came after. So when Keef dropped that Rooms collab with Youngboy in early 2026, people didn't just connect two artists. They connected a chain. Keef to Youngboy, Youngboy to 4KT, 4KT to Lul Timm. That chain formed fast, and once it was formed, the reaction was instant. Comments flooded in, some calling it a betrayal, others defending it as pure business. Two completely opposite camps, both completely convinced they were right. But the situation hadn't even reached its peak yet, because Lul Timm himself was about to step into the spotlight. He went on camera, and he said what he said, that he's got a track with Chief Keef. Already recorded. Sitting in the vault, unreleased. Think about what that sounds like to someone who followed that 2020 situation closely. This isn't indirect anymore. It's not Keef working with Youngboy who happens to be in the same circle. This is Keef directly connected to the specific person people associate with King Von's death. That's a completely different level. The clips went everywhere immediately. People who weren't even that deep into the situation started weighing in. O'Block supporters were heated. King Von's fanbase reacted hard. Some called it clout chasing, said Lul Timm was lying just to stay relevant. Others took it completely seriously, said if it was true, Keef had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And that's when all three of them responded. Keef didn't come out with a long statement. No explanations. No back and forth. Just a clear signal. He moves how he moves. He works with who he wants. Outside pressure doesn't dictate his decisions. That was essentially the message. And for anyone who's followed his career, that wasn't surprising at all. Because that's exactly how he's operated since 2014. He's been independent, unbothered, operating on his own terms. This was just consistent with everything he'd already shown. Youngboy kept it simple too. Showed respect. No interest in feeding drama, no shots fired, just music. And Lul Timm, he leaned into it, called out the reactions directly, told people to stop complaining, acted like the whole situation wasn't serious, which somehow made it feel even more serious to the people watching. Now here's where a lot of people got genuinely confused, because after all of that, nothing happened. No real-world escalation, no confrontation, no serious fallout beyond social media, and that surprised people. Especially people who expected this to follow a pattern they'd seen before. But when you actually look at the circumstances, it makes total sense. Keef isn't in Chicago. He hasn't been for years. The distance he created back in 2014 is still there. He's not operating in the same environment where these kinds of conflicts used to have real-world consequences. Lil Durk, who is probably the most prominent voice connected to King Von's legacy, was dealing with his own serious legal situation at that time, which severely limits what can be said or done publicly. When a key figure is restricted like that, the temperature on a situation drops automatically. And then there's Lul Timm himself. His biggest case was already dismissed. No active conviction, no legal weight hanging over him the same way people assumed. So, from a pure logistics standpoint, the conditions that would usually make something like this escalate just weren't there. But there's also a bigger picture factor that people don't want to admit. The industry has genuinely changed. 10 years ago, a situation with this much history behind it, with these kinds of connections and these kinds of names involved, would have looked very different. There would have been a response that went beyond comment sections. But today, artists are global. They're independent in a way they've never been before. They collaborate across lines that used to be uncrossable. Legal consequences are heavier now. People move more carefully. And situations that once escalated off the internet now usually stay exactly where they started. Online. As debates, as arguments, as posts that spike and then fade. That's not weakness. That's just the reality of how things operate in 2026. And when you strip everything away and look at what actually happened here, it's actually pretty simple. An artist made a decision. Two decisions, really. He worked with Youngboy. And apparently, he worked with Lul Timm. He didn't ask anyone for permission. He didn't explain himself. He just did it. And a lot of people had a lot of feelings about that because it touched something that still isn't resolved. The grief around King Von, the anger that never fully had anywhere to go after that case was dropped. The expectation that certain people should operate under certain rules. But here's the truth that this whole situation keeps circling. Chief Keef was never really playing by those rules. Not since 2014. Not since he left. He built his entire post-Chicago career around not being tied to those expectations. So when people react like he violated some code, they're applying a code to someone who opted out of it years ago. That doesn't make it hurt less for the people who feel it. King Von's name still carries real weight. His memory still shapes how people react to situations like this, and that's not going to change because of one collab or one claimed track, but it does tell you something about where things are heading. Because what used to be a hard line is now something artists cross openly. And the response, as intense as it was online, stayed online. No major fallout, no real-world consequences, just noise, a lot of noise. And maybe that's the most honest thing this whole situation revealed. That the gap between what people expect to happen and what actually happens is wider now than it's ever been. And that gap, that's where the whole story lives.